We spend a huge chunk of our lives at work, so it's really no surprise that romances spark up between colleagues. But what happens when they end? Today, we're digging into the hidden and often direct line from a soured office romance to sexual harassment, all based on a fascinating framework from researchers Charles Pierce and Herman Aguinis.
So just how common is this? Well, get this. A full third of all romantic relationships actually begin right there, in the workplace.
But here's where it gets complicated. Nearly half of them, 48%, eventually fall apart. And that's a problem because you still have to show up and see your ex at the water cooler every single day.
And here is the stat that really stops you in your tracks. HR professionals report that nearly a quarter of all sexual harassment claims come directly from an office romance that went sour. So the big question is, why?
Here's our game plan. We'll start with the core problem. Then we'll look at the motives behind the romance itself. From there, we'll see how breakups can turn into harassment, explore 5 key risk factors, and finally, talk about how to manage the aftermath.
All right, let's dive into Section 1, when office romance sours. The real puzzle we're trying to solve is why the outcomes of these breakups are just so wildly different.
I mean, why is it that some ex-couples can work together just fine, while other breakups completely blow up and devolve into harassment? That's exactly what this framework helps us understand.
Okay, Section 2, the motives behind the romance. The big idea here is that to understand the breakup, you first have to understand why the relationship started in the first place. The why is everything. The researchers say there are 3 main motives.
First up, you've got the love motive. This one's pretty straightforward, right? It's a genuine desire to find a long-term companion.
Second is the ego motive. Now, this one isn't about deep connection. It's about the thrill, the adventure, the sexual experience, or just plain old ego satisfaction.
And third, we have the job-related motive. This one is all business. It's purely transactional, driven by a desire to get ahead. Looking for a promotion, more power, or maybe just job security.
Now, this is crucial. How these motives combine between 2 people creates 5 totally distinct types of romance. At one end, you have those genuine, love-based relationships called companionate romances. At the complete other end, you have purely transactional ones, like utilitarian or mutual user types. And then you have flings, which are kind of in the middle. These distinctions are about to become very, very important.
Which brings us to Section 3, from breakup to harassment. Now let's connect these romance types to the actual fallout.
But first, a quick legal distinction we need to make. There's hostile environment harassment. That's when things like unwanted jokes or comments make the workplace feel intimidating. And then there's quid pro quo, which is Latin for this for that. This is a direct trade. Do something for me sexually and you'll get a promotion. Or if you don't, your job is at risk.
And here is the core proposition of this whole framework. The motive predicts the type of harassment. When those love-based romances end, the fallout tends to be hostile environment harassment. Think unwanted attempts to reconnect or win the person back. But, and this is a huge but, when those transactional job-related romances dissolve, they're far more likely to become severe quid pro quo harassment, where power is used as a weapon. And flings, since they were mostly about ego, they actually have a low chance of leading to either. Okay, so that brings us to Section 4. The romance type is the starting point. But there are 5 other key factors that can act like dials, turning a bad breakup truly toxic.
These are the amplifiers. We're talking about power dynamics, who initiated the breakup, individual personalities, lingering emotions, and even the company's own culture. Let's touch on each one.
First up is social power. And there's a key difference here. Position power comes from your formal title, you're the boss. Personal power is more about your expertise or influence. When a transactional romance ends, that position power is a huge red flag for quid pro quo harassment.
Second, who ended it? This is a big one. One-sided breakups are way riskier than mutual splits. The person who is broken up with is statistically more likely to engage in harassing behavior, often as a way to try and regain a sense of control.
Third, what the researchers call a partner's proclivity to harass. For some people, a past romance can feel like a license to continue unwanted behavior. They might use the excuse, "Hey, we used to date," to justify actions that are no longer welcome.
Fourth, leftover feelings. Think about it. Having to see your ex every day at work can really intensify negative emotions like anger and jealousy.
As the paper says, that repeated exposure could greatly intensify one's negative affect, making harassment much more likely.
And fifth, and this is a big one, the organization's tolerance. If a company has weak policies or a culture that just ignores bad behavior, the risk of harassment skyrockets. The culture really is the final gatekeeper.
So that brings us to our last section, managing the aftermath. Knowing all of this, what can actually be done?
Well, this framework helps us spot the most volatile situations. A love romance that ends badly with a one-sided breakup and raw emotions can easily become a hostile environment. But the most dangerous recipe? That's a transactional romance with a power imbalance and a one-sided breakup. That's a classic precursor to quid pro quo harassment.
To manage these risks, some companies are now using a tool called a consensual relationship agreement, sometimes called a love contract, where employees formally document their relationship.
These agreements try to put everything on the table proactively. They confirm the relationship is consensual, they establish that either person can end it without professional consequences, and they can even set rules for how to behave at work after a breakup.
And that brings us to our final thought. The researchers themselves point out their framework was built on studies of opposite-sex couples. So it leaves us with a critical question to think about. How might these same dynamics of motive, power, and emotion play out differently or similarly when the romantic partners are of the same sex? It's a reminder that as the workplace continues to evolve, so must our understanding of the complex human relationships within it.